Next time you find yourself standing on a train platform or stopped at a crossing while a freight train roars past, do something almost nobody does. Ignore the train. Look underneath it. Beneath the steel rails and the heavy ties, you will see the exact same thing you would see in Japan, in Germany, in India, or in the middle of Kansas. Stones. Millions and millions of rough, gray, jagged stones, stretching in an unbroken river of rock for thousands of miles across every continent on Earth. And here is the question that should bother you. We can land machines on other planets. We can build trains that travel over 300 kilometers per hour. So why does almost every railway on the planet still rest on what looks like a pile of loose gravel? The full answer is stranger than you can imagine. It involves an invisible war against the sun that engineers fight every summer. It involves a machine longer than a football field that literally swallows the railway, digests it, and rebuilds it behind itself as it crawls forward. It explains why the fastest trains ever built had to abandon the stones entirely, and why some engineers regret it. And it ends with the strangest detail of all, because the name of these stones has nothing to do with trains. It was born on the ocean, centuries before the first locomotive existed. We'll get to all of that. But everything, every secret on this list, starts with one brutal problem: weight. A fully loaded freight train can weigh over 15,000 tons. Now focus on where all that weight actually touches the rail. Each steel wheel meets the steel rail on a contact patch, roughly the size of a small coin. All of that mass, funneled through a few dozen coin-sized points. The pressure at those contact points is measured in tons per square centimeter, enough to reshape hardened steel over time. If you transferred that kind of pressure directly into ordinary soil, the ground would simply surrender. The track would sink, tilt, twist, and within weeks the railway would tear itself apart. So engineers built a pressure reduction machine, and they built it out of layers. Think of the track as a cake. The rail sits on top. The rail rests on the ties, those heavy beams of wood or concrete, which immediately spread each wheel's load across a wider footprint. And the ties rest on a bed of crushed stone, usually 30 to 50 centimeters deep, that spreads the load even further. By the time the force reaches the natural ground below, the crushing pressure of a locomotive has been diluted into something the Earth can carry all day, every day, for a century. But here is the detail that surprises almost everyone. Look closely at a railway, and you'll realize the track is not attached to the planet. There are no bolts running into the Earth, no concrete anchors. The entire railway is floating, held in position by nothing except the weight of the stones and the friction between them. That sounds insane, and it is actually the genius of the whole design, because a floating track can flex. Every passing train hammers the rails with vibration and shock, and a structure that is rigidly fixed must absorb all of that violence into itself until something cracks. A floating track shrugs. It moves a fraction of a millimeter, dissipates the energy down into the stone bed, and settles back. The looseness is not a flaw. The looseness is the suspension system. Now, if stones are just there to spread weight, then any stones should work, right? Grab a handful from a riverbed and pour them under the track. Except if you did that, you would cause a derailment. Pick up a piece of real track ballast, and the first thing you notice is that it's unpleasant to hold. Sharp corners, fractured faces, edges that bite your palm. You will never, anywhere in the world, find smooth, rounded pebbles under a serious railway. And the reason is something you can feel in your own body. Imagine trying to stand on a pit filled with marbles. Round objects roll across each other. Under the pounding vibration of a 1,000-ton train, a bed of rounded river stones would behave like a liquid, flowing away from the load, letting the track wander and spread until the rails no longer held their gauge. So ballast is never gathered, it is manufactured. Quarries blast apart some of the hardest rock available, granite, quartzite, dense volcanic stone, and crush it specifically to create sharp, angular fragments. When angular stones are packed and compressed, Their edges lock into each other like a three-dimensional puzzle. The bed becomes a solid, gripping mass that refuses to slide, yet still keeps that trace of flexibility the track needs. And the selection process is more ruthless than you'd think. Candidate stone is put through laboratory torture, including a test where samples are sealed in a rotating steel drum with steel balls and tumbled for hours to measure how quickly the rock grinds itself into dust. Stone that wears too fast is rejected, because as you're about to see, the slow death of ballast is one of the railway's most expensive secrets. Because the stones are not only carrying weight, they are fighting a permanent war against two enemies that have destroyed more railways than any collision ever has. The first enemy is water. If you laid track on bare earth, every heavy rain would turn the foundation into mud, and mud flows. The track would be left hanging over a soup of its own foundation. Lay the track on solid pavement instead, and water pools on the surface with nowhere to go, attacking the steel and the fastenings. A deep bed of angular stone solves both problems at once because it is full of gaps. Rain passes straight through it, sideways and downward, away from the track, like a drainage trench thousands of miles long. Minutes after a storm, the foundation is already dry. The second enemy is slower and greener. Plants. Notice how rarely you see vegetation thriving in the middle of a busy track. That is not chemical warfare alone. A thick layer of sharp, sterile, fast-draining rock is a hostile desert for seeds. There is no soil to grip, no standing moisture to drink. And this matters more than cosmetics, because roots are demolition tools. Given a few seasons, root systems pry apart the stone bed, drag soil up into the gaps, and quietly dismantle the foundation from inside. So this humble gray bed is simultaneously a load spreader, a storm drain, and a weed barrier. But it cannot do those jobs forever, and this is where the story goes somewhere most people have never heard. Ballast dies. Slowly, invisibly, under every train, the stones grind against each other, and those sharp interlocking edges, the entire reason the stones were chosen, wear away. Every impact shaves off microscopic particles, and those particles, along with coal dust from freight, wind-blown dirt, and soil pumped up from below, sink into the gaps between the stones and begin filling them. Engineers call this fouling, and it is a death sentence in slow motion. As the voids fill with fine material, the bed stops draining. Water lingers. The trapped fines mix with that water into a paste, and now the pumping action of every passing wheel churns the foundation like a piston in a cylinder. In the worst cases, the track develops what crews grimly call wet beds, spots where gray slurry actually erupts up between the stones as a train passes, spraying mud across the ties, a miniature volcano announcing that the foundation beneath it has turned to liquid. In desert regions, the same suffocation happens without a drop of rain, as wind-blown sand relentlessly fills the voids. A fouled ballast bed can no longer cushion, no longer drain, no longer grip. And a railway that ignores it is quietly counting down to disaster, which is why, hidden mostly in the hours after midnight, the world's railways fight back with some of the strangest machines ever built. The most important one attacks a problem you'd think was unsolvable. Over years of traffic, the track slowly settles unevenly, a few millimeters here, a centimeter there, creating dips and tilts that passengers feel as swaying, and that, at speed, become dangerous. How do you lift a railway and put new support underneath it while it stays exactly where it is? With a tamping machine. This yellow monster crawls along the line, grips the rails, physically lifts the entire track, rails, ties, fastenings, into the corrected position, then plunges vibrating steel blades down into the ballast on either side of each tie. The blades shake at dozens of cycles per second and squeeze inward, vibrating the stones until they flow like a heavy liquid and pack themselves tightly into the fresh gap under the raised tie. The machine releases, moves forward a meter, and repeats, thousands of times a night, resetting the geometry of the railway tie by tie. The British developed an alternative with a wonderfully literal name, stone blowing, where a machine measures each dip, lifts the track, and fires a measured charge of small stones through tubes directly into the void beneath the sleeper, leaving the compacted old bed undisturbed. And here's a subtlety that reveals how deep this science goes. Freshly tamped ballast is actually loosened ballast, its interlock partially broken. A track that was just corrected is temporarily weaker, which is why railways once had to run trains slowly over new work for days while traffic gradually compacted it. Today, a companion machine called a dynamic track stabilizer follows the tamper, gripping the track and shaking it horizontally under vertical load. In a single pass, it compresses the settling effect of 100,000 tons of traffic, so the line can reopen at full speed by morning. There is even a dedicated machine, the ballast regulator, whose whole job is sculpting, plowing, and sweeping the stones into that precise trapezoid profile you see from the platform, because even the shape of the pile is engineered. And that shape is your clue to one of the railway's most secret battles, a war fought not against water or weight, but against the sun itself. Modern rails are not the short, clanking segments of old movies. Today's rail is welded into continuous ribbons of steel that can run unbroken for kilometers. No joints, no clickety-clack, a smoother and stronger railway. But steel expands when it heats, and a kilometer of steel in July's sun wants to become longer by dozens of centimeters. It can't. It's clamped to the ties. So instead of expanding, the rail builds up compression, silently, invisibly, a colossal squeezing force accumulating inside the metal through every hot afternoon. If that force ever wins, the result is called a sun kink, and photographs of them look impossible. A railway suddenly buckled sideways into a violent S-shape, hundreds of meters of steel snapping out of line in seconds. Trains have derailed on them. And what stands between every heat wave and that catastrophe is, once again, the stones. The ballast packed tightly against the ends and sides of the ties is the anchor that holds the track in line while the steel strains against it. That is why engineers deliberately pile extra stone into raised shoulders along the outside of curves, exactly where a compressed rail would try hardest to escape. When you see ballast heaped generously at a bend, you are looking at a restraint device, quietly winning a physics battle every summer afternoon. So by now, the stones look unbeatable, cheap, self-draining, self-anchoring, endlessly repairable, which makes the next fact genuinely strange. The fastest trains on Earth fired them. When engineers began pushing trains past 250, then 300 kilometers per hour, the faithful stone bed suddenly revealed a dark side. At those speeds, the storm of air pressure beneath a passing train is violent enough to lift the smaller stones off the bed, and in winter, it gets worse. Ice and compacted snow build up on a train's underframe, then break loose at speed and slam into the ballast like hammers, launching stones in all directions. A stone flicked into the air at 300 kilometers per hour becomes a projectile that shatters windows, wrecks the train's underbody, and gouges the rails themselves, and each impact can kick up further stones in a chain reaction. So for their newest high-speed lines, countries like Japan, Germany, and China switched to what is called slab track, rails fastened directly onto a continuous bed of precision concrete. Nothing loose, nothing to fly. Almost no nightly maintenance, no tamping armies, geometry that barely moves for decades. And yet, the choice is a genuine dilemma. Slab track costs a multiple of ballasted track to build, and when it does fail or shift, repairs are slow, disruptive, and brutally expensive, where a stone railway can be opened, corrected, and reburied in a single night. There's even an acoustic twist. The stone bed, full of air gaps, absorbs noise, and engineers discovered that concrete slab lines are noticeably louder, so loud that many require special sound-absorbing panels bolted on to imitate what the humble gravel did for free. The old pile of rocks, it turns out, was quietly doing half a dozen jobs nobody had ever priced. And when a classic ballasted line finally does wear out, when the stones are fouled and rounded beyond saving, railways deploy the machine I promised you at the start, arguably the most surreal vehicle in existence. Ballast cleaning and track renewal trains are rolling factories, some stretching for hundreds of meters, that devour the railway they are driving on. At the front, a massive cutting chain slides beneath the track and excavates the entire stone bed out from under the ties, while the machine supports the rails above the sudden void. The dugout stone travels by conveyor up into the machine's body, where giant vibrating screens sort it, dumping the ground-down fines and dust into waste wagons and recovering every stone still sharp enough to serve. Fresh stone pours in from hopper wagons, the cleaned and new ballast is laid back down, and behind the machine, tampers and stabilizers immediately rebuild the geometry. The most advanced versions go further, pulling up the old ties and rails, laying new ones, and reballasting in one continuous operation. It is a machine eating a worn-out railway at one end and excreting a new one at the other, advancing meter by meter through the night. Crews measure their progress in hundreds of meters per shift, and by dawn, trains are running over track that was open earth a few hours earlier. Which leaves just one mystery, the one I saved for last, because it might be the strangest fact of all. That word, ballast. It isn't a railway word, it's a sailor's word, and it's centuries older than the locomotive. In the age of sail, a wooden ship traveling empty to collect cargo faced a dangerous problem. Without weight in her hold, she rode too high and too light, rolling wildly, at risk of being knocked flat by the wind. So before departure, crews filled the bottom of the hull with the cheapest heavy material on Earth, stones, and that stabilizing weight was called ballast. When the ship reached port and took on her cargo, the stones were no longer needed, so crews heaved them out onto the waterfront, and generations of this practice left harbor towns literally paved and piled with discarded shipstones from across the world. Then the railway age arrived, and its engineers, hunting for cheap, heavy, durable material to stabilize their brand new tracks, looked at those mountains of abandoned maritime stone sitting conveniently beside the ports and helped themselves. The stones went from steadying ships to steadying trains, and the old nautical name simply came along for the ride. Every railway on Earth still uses it. So the next time a train thunders past and you glance down at that endless gray river of jagged rock, you'll know what you're really looking at. A floating foundation, a storm drain, a weed barrier, a shock absorber, an anchor holding miles of sun-strained steel in line. A material so quietly effective that the fastest trains in the world are still debating whether abandoning it was a mistake, all of it carrying a name born on the ocean. Not just rocks. One of the oldest and most underrated pieces of engineering still working today. If this changed the way you'll look at a railway, hit the like button and subscribe, because the world is full of ordinary things hiding extraordinary stories, and we find a new one every week. Thanks for watching.